afternoon and welcome to the 10th and final Practical Knowledge Series panel of the season. On behalf of BioStrategy Partners, welcome. Today's topic is accelerating growth through strategic partnerships, and we have two fantastic panelists for you today, John and Oleg. I'll allow them to introduce themselves. What I'd like to do before we get started, as always, is thank our sponsors. We have MVM Associates, we have Césaire Raviz, and then we have University Place Associates. University Place Associates is responsible for this great space we have today and the video recording. What I'd like to do is go ahead and ask John maybe to introduce himself.
Sure. I'm John Younger. I am the Vice President for Science and Technology at University City Science Center. I started actually this summer. My responsibilities within the Science Center are primarily to oversee the incubation and early stage granting and investment activities of the center. So we will make grants to universities to help commercialize technology. We will incubate companies as they come in, and then we will, in some cases, make some investments into those companies early on in their history. Prior to that, I was the founder and Chief Technology Officer at Acadium Life Sciences. We're a research tool and material science company based in Ann Arbor, Michigan.
I'm Oleg Shinkaj. I'm founder and CEO of a biotechnology startup called Chromatin. We are innovating in the bioprocessing space, bringing to market a column-free chromatography system for purification of antibodies and other biologics. My prior experience is about 10 years of engineering in the various roles in the bioprocessing industry, and about 10 years ago I founded the company. It's gone through several interesting stages. We incubated in State College, Pennsylvania. Once we de-risked the platform significantly, we moved to Philadelphia, actually at the Science Center, and spent around 15 months at the Science Center. And this April, we finally graduated from incubation into our own space in Springhouse, Pennsylvania.
Great.
Well, thank you. And I'm Michelle Wasco. I'm the Program Director for BioStrategy Partners. I also serve as the COO of a small startup company and worked in large pharma in new product launches. So I'll be your participating moderator today. What I'd like to do is talk about maybe beginning with defining the kinds of strategic partnerships, or rather the kinds of partners. So in our pre-planning call, we talked about industry strategic partners. We talked about those from academia, from the investor world, and incubator spaces as well. And I thought maybe we might start off with sort of defining those for our audience, and then maybe chatting a bit about your personal experiences with those various types of strategic partners. And it looks like all of you are raring to go. We want to start with you and maybe some of your experience with industry and academic partners.
Sure, yeah. For us, strategic partnerships are our bread and butter. The reason is because we are in a heavily regulated and quite conservative industry. And so for a small startup to have any type of cred, we have to have partners that are heavy hitters in the industry that basically give us legitimacy in a way. Right? So, it's been a very important part of our business. At the very onset of the company, there was a strategic partnership that basically enabled our existence, which was a partnership with Penn State University. And one of the prime examples of an effective strategic partnership for a startup that's just beginning to emerge is that type of relationship. In our case, we were in a catch-22 situation. And the catch-22 situation was basically, look, we have this patent, this promising technology, but in order to raise funding to make it happen, you need to show very convincing data. But in order to show convincing data, you have to have funding to enable generating that data. Right? So catch-22 situation, the way through that was to partner up with the university, and we brought a lot of value to that partnership. Eventually, through the years, we hired 10 interns from Penn State, and several of them have become our full-time employees. But at the time, they provided the space for us to do that initial data set. That was very important. And using that initial data set, we were then able to raise a phase 1 NIH grant, and then went on to get it matched by Ben Franklin of Central PA, and that was the inception of our kind of commercialization. So a partnership with an academic institution is one very important pathway. And since then, we've actually developed 2 more partnerships, one with MIT and another one with the University of Maryland. But we are also involved in all sorts of other partnerships. So I would say that there are 2 more types. The first type is a partnership with suppliers. So we are commercializing a manufacturing platform, and within that platform there are various components that are supplied by other companies. So there is a natural fit there for us to collaborate. And that has been a very fruitful path for us because especially early on, we were able to secure significant pieces of equipment, for instance, for free in many cases. And what we gave back to those companies is publicity, exposure, and then the potential for us to adopt their technology once we have the funding to do it, which we have done. And so we've done that a number of times and published a bunch of white papers, so we made them very happy, and it was a very beneficial relationship. And then the third one, of course, is the end users, right? So the companies that are going to be eventually using your product, right? So those are, I would say, the most important relationships, and because the success of those relationships enables really the fundraising and enables major exposure within the community. So, for instance, we have partnerships with Merck and we have partnership with Roche, very big names in the biopharma market. And once you show that your technology works very well with their products, and they, you basically ask them to write up a letter that says, hey, here's an official letter, we've done this evaluation, it looks really promising, we'd like to scale the platform once it's ready to commercialize. That really helps with going back to investors and raising the funds. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of a broad overview of our engagements. Of course, last but not least, there are investors. But that's not such a... I guess the investors are not really the subject here, but they are definitely a strategic relationship. You have to manage your investors very strategically. So, anyway, so I'll let John.
Yeah, so I'm happy to just continue that thought. So I think that our experience at Acadian Life Sciences was really similar. I mean, I think a lot of startups, not surprisingly, have their genesis very near a major research institution. Not every time, but often. And that comes with some things that are, I think, real advantages, and it comes with some things that are challenges. The advantage is that you have an enormous collection of potential beta users of your technology. So there are plenty of folks, within the walls of the institution that can help, evaluate your work. There are folks that can actually do work with you to sort of sort out the technology, to sort of solve some key technical problems. And I think those are real advantages to having a university partner nearby. The challenge can be that it's a little bit too comfortable. I think a lot of founders have not uncommonly have fairly strong university ties, and it's sort of a safe space. But at the end of the day, you can partner with the university all you want, but unless the university is going to become a really key customer, there is a sort of an edge to where that collaboration is going to be able to move your company forward. And then at that point, the need to go out and find industrial partners is really, really key. And that's when you as a startup sort of cross that emotional bridge, and you say now it's time to go out and start talking to real end users and real potential customers, and even potential corporate investors or acquirers. That's a really big deal for the company, and it requires a different mindset. If you have a institution that helped you create your technology, your incentives are fairly aligned. If you go to them, you will likely be able to find some assistance. When you start working we start working towards alliances with users or with companies, what happens then is that you will have some people say yes and some people say no, and you have to go out and really sort of hit the pavement and start talking to folks and trying to find what relationships make the most sense and which ones are going to go forward and which ones aren't. Because some of them you will spend a lot of time trying to find common ground, and at the end of the day, it doesn't happen, right?
Yeah.
But it's just part of it. But there's I think a lot more potential for rejection for an early stage company in dealing with potential industrial partners than there is in working with university partners. University partners, I think, in general, are fairly happy to very happy to engage. But with a potential corporate partner, it gets a little bit more complicated, and there's it's a much longer courtship than it might be with universities.
So can I ask one or both of you to talk a little bit more about how you find the right partners, right? And what kinds of questions you ask, what kinds of activities you conduct with them to determine whether or not they're the right partner?
Yeah, there are several ways of doing it. In terms of managing risk of partnerships, that's a very serious question, and that's a serious question because for a small company, a strategic partnership gone wrong can have a terrible effect. Mm-hmm. So if you have an industrial partnership with a large company, if something goes wrong for them, it's just a write-off. I mean, it's not a big deal. But for you, if you have put a lot of resources and time into that relationship and have set up a sort of a framework to make it work, if that relationship fails, it could be a disaster. So you have to be very careful, and you have to manage that risk, right? So I'll give you an example. We had a strategic partnership where the company ended up, that was our partner, they were a medium-sized company, they ended up acquired. Somebody bought them, and the acquirer didn't want to work with us. So that's just an example of a risk that can happen. You have to be careful. You have to know whether the team is really invested in the partnership. You have to have a good champion that is committed, and you have to manage that relationship very closely. In terms of how to find needs, how to find value, how to find whether there is a right fit. I mean, it usually happens on the personal side and the product side, right? Typically, these companies from your networking, and you have to make an assessment whether they bring value ultimately to your bottom line, and whether you can bring value to them. That's actually a very important point, right? So you have to carefully analyze how you can bring value to them, and from that you can initiate discussions.
So let's explore that a little bit more. When you talk about bringing value, can you give us examples of what that means, for example, in your own case, if that's not revealing too much, or John?
So I think that it is customer discovery, right? I mean, it's just like any other part of customer discovery, and the way that I think you approach that most successfully is that you start by having no assumptions about what it is that might be valuable, right? You don't know for sure what your partner is potentially looking for, and really from the get-go, it's just trying to ask thoughtful questions and try to explore why, what is it that's not working for them, right? So if they've engaged with you, either by you reaching out or by them reaching out, they've done that for some reason, right? There's some motivation behind that, and trying to have some understanding. Is there something that they're looking for help with? I mean, our experience was that commonly that there was either a specific question that the partner was looking to try to solve, or they were just generally trying to understand what's in the landscape, what's out there. What's being developed, where are the new opportunities? Those are different. Those have different potential in terms of partnerships, right? So one where there's a real need, that's a great potential partnership to locate if you can. If someone has a problem that you can solve, that's fantastic. But it's not always that way, right? And so really, it's just trying to understand what they do now and what what they're interested in, why they're interested in taking the meeting, right? Why were you able to set up a meeting and speak with them? And I think all those things, it's really just a matter of curiosity and not making an assumption that you really understand what motivated them. I mean, it might have been your amazing pitch deck, but it probably wasn't. It was probably something more subtle. They have, larger companies have incredibly deep technical experience. They have incredibly deep business experience. They will understand your technology oftentimes more than you will, if not in the small scale, but what would be required to make it a large scale thing. They certainly have much deeper understanding of what the market opportunities would be. And so, our experience has been that the more you can listen to them talk about what they're looking for, the more they will teach you. It's an incredibly informative experience. And I think that you can have those conversations, and a really key element of having those early conversations with partners is to be having those conversations with more than one, right? So you can have a meeting on Monday. You can come back from New York having learned a lot about what someone's looking for. You can have another meeting, in Boston on Thursday with another potential partner in a similar space, and all of those conversations about value, allow a hypothesis about your value to be tested with the next conversation and truly learn that. But it's a funnel just like a customer funnel is, and just trying to understand why they might have value in you, and being prepared that your value may look nothing like what you expected.
Mm-hmm.
So, and just to add to that, when you're talking to large companies that have end user partnership potential, right? Typically they're coming to the table from the point of view that they have a mandate to innovate within their organization. And the way that these companies innovate is primarily through partnership and acquisitions. Large companies are not very well known for their savvy for internal sort of innovation, especially breakthrough innovation. Right? They look for partnerships, they look for companies outside of their internal resources. And so when you talk to them, you have to create a very convincing business case. It's not just about, look at this cool toy that we have. Mm-hmm. The business case has to be very convincing. It has to be very clear, and you have to be open to tailoring it to what they see as value. So they have their own particular processes. For instance, Merck has a different process from Roche on their manufacturing floor, right? So you have to be able to take their input and use it in your sort of pitch to them. Mm-hmm. And I totally agree about the listening. I think that that's absolutely key. It's one of the greatest assets if you are a good listener and you can quickly pick up on exactly what they need and whether you can offer that and how you can basically incorporate their need into what you're offering. Mm-hmm. So
let's dig in, if we might, to customer discovery. I think that's a term that those of us who have done it before, all of a sudden it makes perfect sense, right? But some of our audience maybe have heard the term, but they haven't gone through that process. Would one of you like to sort of talk about what it's entailed in customer discovery, and maybe some anecdotal evidence about where maybe your biggest surprises or sort of the aha moment that you got from that process?
Sure. I mean, the general idea is that you enter into a conversation with a potential customer. It may be a partner. It may just be a customer who's going to buy a bottle of your material. But you enter into that conversation with as few assumptions as possible about what they need, and really approach it from the perspective of trying to understand what they do in the course of their day that's relative to your technology. So what are they doing currently? Understanding where their current approach succeeds, where it fails, what they would consider success in terms of a new technology, what makes them reluctant to make a change into a new platform, what makes them eager to make a change into a new platform. It's really understanding everything that would be required for you to come back to them with an actual pitch. And there are different schools of thought about how to approach it. I'm a fan of approaching it without really discussing the technology that you're bringing to the table at all until as late in the conversation as possible, because you don't want to close off potential avenues of value by having them start to think about what you're doing, as opposed to having them think out loud about what they're trying to solve. And that's really, and it's true. It's true of talking to an individual customer who might be wanting to order a pizza from you. It's the exact same thing as if, hey, do you want to become the major strategic partner of our company? It's what do they not have now, and what would they consider valuable, and then what would be required for them to engage. Those are. And the customer will tell you exactly what they need. If you listen carefully, they'll tell you what it is that you should be selling them, right? If you just listen carefully. And then the question then becomes easier, is this something we want to provide to them or not, right? Can we do this within our strategic scope? But it's just trying to sit down and let someone sort of brag about their work, complain about their work, and just tell you where they're trying to go, and then trying to figure out how you would move that along for them. So.
And to add to that, it's good to be sort of empathetic to what they're actually trying to do. Like what they're doing is actually really difficult. Mm-hmm. If especially on the technical front, like if there's a mandate for innovation, first of all, they have a ton of different opportunities that they have to screen, and they have very limited resources on how to screen them. And the screening process is highly technical and labor intensive, and you have to have multiple conversations. And when they do decide to engage on the technical side, they have to run very detailed technical campaigns, and they have to make sure that these technical campaigns can scale, right? Mm-hmm. It's important when you come to these discussions to have that in mind, that A, they're talking to multiple people, and B, you have to have this very unique proposition to bring them the value. Mm-hmm. So it's important to get well prepared for these meetings.
Yep, and I think one of Acadium's really core experiences was learning from the questions that were asked. I mean, so they would ask specific questions about the technology, about the market segment we thought was the most appropriate, and there's a lot of knowledge behind a particular question. And so if they ask a specific technical question, to you might seem, well, it's strange that they would ask that, but if you have a moment to reflect, why would they, from what experience would they come at me with that question? That is incredibly informative about, how they're going to approach the sort of the technical sorting out of what you're doing. Are they coming at this from, show me 5 happy customers? Are they coming at this from, show me 5, reproducibly manufactured batches? They're very different approaches to what they want to see, what they want to know about the market. And again, they know a lot of things, but they don't know everything. And the questions that they ask you, if you're really attentive, the questions they ask you can be very helpful in trying to establish, how are you going to go down the path with them, and what is it, what is it that you need to focus on when you continue to engage them. We've learned we learned so much about manufacturing, about quality control, about inventory practices. We learned so much about that simply by talking to potential partners about what they're thinking about, and then listening to the questions they asked. And you can build out a remarkably strong case, in my experience, by just listening to what their priorities are and how they're going to sequence the decision with whether or not they're going to work with you.
So one of the things that I hear sometimes from early stage entrepreneurs or folks starting up their first business is some anxiety about engaging with industry partners. There's a fear that there might be an attempt to steal your IP or take advantage of the small dog. And you spoke to this earlier, Oleg, about risk. Can you talk a little bit about how you manage that risk? We can talk about the specifics of things like a CDA, or we can talk more, do you engage attorneys? Is it more a matter of just being attentive to the conversations? And how did you manage the risk?
Sure. So I think that the risk you mentioned, the risk of IP theft, I think it's very real in some industries. Thankfully, it's not prevalent in ours. In ours, the risk is a bit different. For us, the biggest risk of engaging with a strategic partner is basically them kind of boxing us in and preventing us from realizing exit value potentially with other companies. So we've had to manage that very carefully. And in several of these big partnerships that we were considering, we had to consider the language of that and how that could be managed. And it's not a simple issue to manage, because if you're making a partnership with let's say a manufacturing entity, they'll want some sort of exclusivity. Typically, right? And then exclusivity may limit your exit options or your options for other types of partnerships. So, those relationships. The other risk is, of course, let's say you make a partnership and the quality is not there. If it's a product-related partnership, how do you extricate yourself from that? If a partner doesn't hold up their end of the bargain, so to say. You have to have backup plans, and that's and that makes your small company very vulnerable. So, those are the risks that I would carefully consider.
Yeah, I think the risk you often hear is the risk about intellectual property, and I completely agree. That's not the one that's going to keep you awake, right? Once you're in it, that's not the problem, right? So the intellectual property issue, I would just spend 1 second about that to say that having a non-disclosure agreement doesn't mean very much. It should not mean very much with you. It's great that you have it, but that doesn't mean that you, at the next meeting, you sort of like throw the doors open and say, welcome, let us show you everything. Really, I think our approach had always been there'll be sort of a graded reveal of information as that relationship went forward. Things that were required to make sort of a perhaps a technical handshake between your material and someone else's process or whatever. Those things would be revealed, but not more than that, right? And I certainly know that we'd worked with partners that if they had wanted to, they could work with our material and probably completely reverse engineer our material if they really wanted to. But that's not really what they're doing. They're not in the business. That's not what they're here to do, right? And it doesn't help anyone for them to sort of worry about that. And so I think that having an understanding about confidentiality is important, but it should not keep you from revealing what needs to be revealed and nothing more. I think the other concerns are really much more important. I think a relationship where you're set up to have really sort of a sole source of a key material, where there's a supplier and they're the only one that really has the ability to provide you with something important that you need. That relationship is really important. It needs to be tended very carefully, and you have to any extent possible, have some contingency if that were to not be able to go forward. The other issue and I'll just amplify what Oleg said. The other issue is that you do want to. The real thing to avoid is a relationship where your degrees of freedom have been limited because of the relationship, right? And it may not be complete exclusivity, but every partner is going to want you, in the fold as much as they can have you, and your goal is to sort of engage with them, but to not be cut off from other opportunities, unless the arrangement is extremely, sort of demonstrably valuable to you, right? So if it really brings something, wildly useful to the company, then I think you have to think seriously about going forward. But early on, I think it's risky. I think early on you need to have as many conversations as possible, which is always a good negotiating strategy anyway. Have many options to pick from. It helps you have clear-headed conversations with all the potential partners.
And that can be difficult sometimes, especially at the early stage, if you're cash strapped.
Yep.
And a partner comes in and says, "Yeah, I'll invest $1 million." You know, and you're like, "Wow." Yeah, but it can box you in. So you got to be very careful. And I think the one thing you were talking about, grants, right? For early stage companies, especially in life sciences, I think it's one of the most important aspects of I think succeeding is having those grants in place. They allow you the freedom. They allow you the sort of the runway to make the right decisions. And I know you mentioned that you guys at the Science Center do some of the grants. So that's a really great service to some of these early stage companies, because they really need, even if it's a small one, $50,000 or $100,000, that could make a huge difference.
Right. I mean, it could be a year of operating revenue at a very early stage company, which can be really important. Yeah, it's true.
So let's talk a little bit about incubators and those kinds of support services, economic development agencies as partners, strategic partners. I know the Science Center certainly has a great reputation for all that they do for the entrepreneurial community. Maybe you want to talk about that a bit, John?
So it's interesting because I had until this spring I'd been on the other side of this conversation, and we were we worked in a really great incubation space in Ann Arbor. It did a lot of the things right that I think the Science Center does right. It's when you look to engage with folks that could potentially incubate with you, there's a core set of things. They'll need the facilities and sort of the physical resources that you need. They will have folks around that can offer the help that you're likely to need, and that help is typically legal. It may be IP, but oftentimes it's just more operational, sort of daily legal work that needs to be done, work related to standing up the company, managing the board, et cetera. It has, it may have, certainly like with biolabs at the Science Center right now, they may have greater purchasing power for buying materials and things that you need just on the basis of how their business works. And so I think, being able to bring some economy, some inexpensive resources and expertise, having all that stuff in one place is really key. And I think that, one of the things about incubators, and I know this is Oleg's experience, incubators are great. At some point, if things are going well, you will outgrow them. And then it's time to move on. And that's really, that's exactly what everyone was really driving towards. It's like, let's provide the value that you need now. A company in their first year, the inputs that will really move them along are quite different than a company in its fifth year. And so you have to understand that you'll partner with different folks, with different incubation resources or other just sort of business support resources, that will be very fluid over time, and you'll move through several of those relationships. And I think really, the goal is, to find partners that are there to help. Those partners may, want. They may approach you simply for rent and for services rendered. They may want to have some participation in your company. They may want to have They may want to have an equity stake. They may want to have some other relationship where that if you succeed with their help, that everyone benefits. But in general, those are just really great friendships that if everything goes well, will be relatively short-lived because you'll be on to the next thing right away. And I think it's one of the things, the Science Center right now, in one way or the other, we incubate or somehow facilitate about 70 companies. It's crazy how many folks that we work with, and everybody has different needs. But but when we look at companies, to incubate, we're looking for folks that have ideas with great potential, that are sort of coachable, that sort of understand you have to come in, be citizens of the incubator, and sort of good attitudes and great sort of work ethics raise all ships, and sort of looking at all those things. But it's we've really enjoyed, and I've personally, professionally, very enjoyed getting a chance to work with a lot of companies on the flip side of the relationship for the first time. It's my first time within any incubation program. So
yeah. I mean, we've had quite an extensive experience with 2 incubation programs, right? One was in State College and the other in the Science Center. And it's important that the people that facilitate these incubators have a very active sort of networking and educational aspect to them. So it's not just like a cheap room you get somewhere with equipment access, although not particularly cheap. Let me rephrase that.
Right. Yeah, but here's the cheap rooms with good equipment,
especially
right?
Nowadays.
Not that there's anything wrong with that, right?
So for instance, Karina, she runs some of these events, and I attended several events while we were at the Science Center, and found our attorney that way, because he was on one of the panels. I liked how he presented himself. I liked what he had to say, and he's worked out great for us. He's leading us through our Series A right now on the legal side. So you never know what kind of opportunities can arise from these networking sessions.
Yep.
And the other facilitator back at State College, his name was Dan Leary. He was just incredibly helpful with anything. You could call him at any time, any problem you have, and he'll really try sincerely to help you. And that's just been a great experience for us. For 5 years, he helped us with any sort of problem that arose. So generally, incubation experiences, I think, are very beneficial for small companies. I would highly recommend doing it. And then you have to, like you said, you have to figure out the right time to leave. You can't overstay.
And it's funny. I think one thing that I would always tell early stage companies is that when you're looking for somewhere to sort of set up shop, you have to be very clear about exactly what it is that you need, right? And when we launched Acadian Life Sciences in Ann Arbor, for the first year that we were in business, and our business was a material science, a chemistry, and a cell biology company. That's what we did. Our first year of operations was at a 3x5 table in a software company in Ann Arbor, and we don't make software. We don't do that at all. And it was a software company called Menlo Innovations, and we loved it because they were incredibly strongly behind the idea of very structured customer discovery and really engaging with end users to understand what's going on. They, in addition to doing software, they provide courses, and people would come from all over the world to sit on these conversations about user experience and just to be in the presence of really large company representatives would come in to just sort of learn how do you get a better user experience, and how do you understand what users want. For that point in our company, we needed that much more than we needed a freezer. We could rent a freezer for a few bucks a month, and we actually rented lab space by the hour. early on, because so much of the work we were doing was about business development. It was not about technical development. And for that moment, that was exactly where we should be incubating. We raised our first money there because an investor happened to walk by and start talking to us, right? And later on, we needed much more technical facilities. But early on, in sort of hatching the idea, that's not a very capital intensive part of the job. It's really just a lot of work. And so thinking about exactly what it is that your company needs, and thinking hard, I think, about who your neighbor's going to be within the incubator is really key. And that goes, that sort of cultural connection, I think, goes back to any partnership you're going to have. At the end of the day, are the folks that you're sitting across the table from people that you want to spend time with, because you may end up spending a remarkable amount of time with them. And just making sure that there's a good cultural fit, that the way that they're approaching problems is the way that your team likes to approach problems. Because if you misalign that, it can lead to a lot of sort of inefficiency and a lot of just sort of headache. And I think just like you would pick a partner, I think picking an incubator based on who you're going to be sitting next to and who's the first person that says good morning to you in the morning, those things actually really matter at the end of the day in terms of building the team and being productive.
So let's talk about investors as strategic partners, right? I'm going to lean on John first with his expertise in therapeutics, because I think it's fair to say that in general, identifying your potential acquirers and tapping them as a potential investor is becoming, in my estimation, increasingly important in the therapeutic space. So maybe we can talk about that a little bit.
Sure. So I think I can speak fairly openly now about Acadium's experience and my startup's experience with Agilent. So we just announced a new technical development program with Agilent. And we've been working with them for some time now. Agilent not only is a strategic partner, Agilent is an investor. Agilent actually has a board seat on Acadium's board. And that's a relationship that's been rolling now for several years. And it brings all the things that you'd sort of hope that it would bring. I mean, they've been just a remarkable partner. They may have bottomless technical understanding of their field. It's just remarkable to work with them on a technical perspective. But they also understand a lot of market drivers that we're just too small to necessarily have immediate insight into. That relationship progressed through several parallel channels, and I think it's. I think that, for us, I mean, I won't speak for the rest of the company, but I'll say for me personally, it seems like a really ideal opportunity to sort of partner with a really great organization. There certainly is more corporate venture, I think, than ever before, and I think the same basic rules apply in terms of making sure that they can bring value, but they don't necessarily hem you in. Right, you want to make sure that there are clear rules of engagement that simply by being an investor, that does not remove the organization's ability to make decisions outside of the relationship with that one company. And that, I think, those are the sort of the things, good fences make for good neighbors. I mean, that's the sort of work that really has to be done and early on. And I think a sophisticated business partner will understand, where you're coming from. No one's going to be shocked that you want to make sure that you protect your company's ability to operate and to work with other organizations and things like that. But the money, I think an investment or even a strategic partnership without an investment, that is such an enormous endorsement of at least the market pull and the opportunity that the technology may be important. That is so critically valuable in going out to other investors. What better way to de-risk what you're working on than to have a global leader in that space come in and say, we want to work with you in some capacity, right? It is the strongest signal you could probably ever hope to generate. It's much greater than any sort of compelling case you might make on slide 5 of your deck, right? It's just like to have someone that sort of knows what you're doing, understands what it could be worth, and that wants to work with you. That is an amazing way to help sort of build out more of an investment syndicate, because it's like you're in it now, right? It's a thing. It has to be managed, but I think all in all, I think our experience with it was really favorable, but it took time to sort that out.
Yeah. On our side, that's a great point. On our side, one powerful example I can cite is because we're in the biomanufacturing space, the FDA plays a very significant role in regulating that space. So our customers have to validate their processes with the FDA. So it's a costly, labor-intensive, and intense process, right? For us, the endorsement that you were sort of talking about, what better way to get to send a message is our company was lucky enough to score a significant contract directly from the FDA. And so we have a $2.5 million contract that that took over 18 months to put together. It was a pretty intense process. We had to write a very thick proposal and modify it several times. But at the end, it's all worth it because not only because of the funding, but when other investors and customers see that we have this very significant multi-year program that's contracted by the agency that regulates the entire industry of biomanufacturing, that is a very strong signal. That makes people very excited. And it's been and in addition, like you said, Agilent in your case has a bottomless experience on the technical side. Well, the FDA does too, right? So they have seen every possible process you can imagine out there. And they have amazing feedback for us. It's a great relationship for us, for a small startup to have with this very large agency. There's definitely a tremendous benefit to a successful strategic that will influence every single aspect of your business.
Yeah. So Oleg, let me ask you this. So how long after the creation of the company was it before you started going out to start finding the first strategic partner? How long between signing the documents, you exist, till you were sitting down in front of someone saying, can we talk about working together?
I'll start the timeline from our first employee hire instead of when
Okay,
we exist,
all right, okay.
because there was a big gap.
Yes. Yeah.
So,
okay. All right.
So from the first hire until we had a significant strategic, which was the one that got acquired eventually that I mentioned, that was 2 years.
Yeah. So, but you probably started working on it pretty quickly.
Yeah. We started working on it pretty quickly. We had them, in the door showing prototypes. You have to start working on it when you're ready, but as soon as you're ready, just go out there.
Yeah.
But it's important to be ready.
It is, although I think it's important not to wait until you're perfect.
Yeah.
Because I think you can find yourself optimizing your material or your process around some assumption that can't be backed up by actual experience, right? And so I think the conversation's early, even if it's just a hello, tell me what you're working on. I think what you want to do is you don't want to sit quietly in isolation, below everyone's radar, working towards something only to find out that when it's just perfect, it's the thing that no one actually wanted, right? You optimized down the wrong path, and now you have something fantastic, but it's not actually the thing that anyone was going to ask for, right? And so I think that there's that balance of not going out too early, but at least going out, even if you don't share what you're working on, to go out and understand, when it's time, what is it that the partner would want to see, right? And getting that information quickly, so that you're driving, that when you're setting up your internal milestones for the company, or even with an early investor, this is what we're going to try to accomplish. Having a really concrete argument. This is exactly why this one feature is the one that we're going to grind on, right? It's not because it's because the best journals write about this feature. It's because we have 3 different potential strategic partners that have all independently said this is a thing that that we always want to know about, right? So
yeah, for us, I can give you an example of the fundamental differences that our platform can show. So our platform both saves money and improves product quality. And different customers and different agencies that we work with, they either care about one or the other, rarely both. Some of course care about both, but so you have to know what they care about, The FDA cares much more about the product quality aspect of the manufacturing process. That's
Right.
their bread and butter. So you have to show that. You have to work on that. There are companies like that, for instance, some contract manufacturing organizations or biosimilar manufacturers that are much more interested in maintaining product quality, of course, but saving the cost. So you have to have that message presented to them. So
Yep.
to your point.
May I ask you the same question you asked Oleg? How long from your start to your first strategic conversation?
Not more than 3 months. I mean, we were out, and when we founded Acadium, we had not actually done our first manufacturing run before we were walking the halls at the University of Michigan with empty bottles to try to get purchase orders. So we were out looking very early to sort of have, to sort of gauge, need by saying, well, if this is so great, would you actually, pay for it, right? Because everyone will tell you what you're working on is great. But if they'll put a purchase order down, that's a different thing. So we were out doing that very quickly simply on the customer side. But we use that same approach very quickly to go out and talk to potential strategics. And actually, in some ways, you might say that we actually had engaged our first strategic partner before we incorporated. I think you can actually. I think you can make a case that we'd actually started having partnership conversations, even in our very earliest customer discovery, pre-product development stage. We'd already identified a couple of organizations that we would want to, we would. When we were developing, we were thinking specifically about what they had told us about what they were looking for. And so as early as it could have been, I mean, right there at the beginning, we had some argument. And it will matter in your conversations with your earliest investors, why are you doing what you're doing? Because, everyone's going to love it is not a great argument, right? But if you say, we just had our second visit with X, in 2 months, and this is exactly what we're hearing from them, and we can do that. That's a much more compelling case to bring, to a potential funding source than simply, making the argument, what we do is amazing. So.
And one more kind of avenue for strategic partnerships that really opened up in our space, but it actually exists in many other spaces. There are these manufacturing institutes. Are you aware of them? Manufacturing institutes that are sponsored by various government agencies. So in our case, in biomanufacturing, there's a relatively young institute called Nimble. The way that they work is actually quite interesting from the strategic perspective, because they actually force people, not force, but they require on project proposals that they fund, several organizations to be partnered, including small business members. So, and that's a requirement, a hard requirement for a large proposal, whatever, over $300,000, you have to have several partners, and that facilitates a lot of networking and discussion and cross-functional projects. So we've been quite successful so far with that organization. We scored a couple of projects with them, and we've seen that through other projects and through the discussions, the power of this approach. And there are, I believe, 11 of these institutes, all through kind of the different fields. There's one on robotics, there's one on regenerative medicine, there's one on 3D printing and additive manufacturing. I can't recall all of them, but I would strongly advise anybody who is in those spaces to at least find the relevant institute and see what the opportunities are. Especially for the small companies, they're willing to make some relatively flexible arrangements in terms of membership. The membership for small companies is typically not super expensive, but it could really yield a lot of opportunities. So just another tool out there.
Wonderful. Well, my friendly timekeeper tells me that it's 1 o'clock, and
Wow.
I would love to ask before we wrap up, any maybe final words of wisdom that you might like to share with our audience here, and I'll start with you, Oleg.
Final words of wisdom. Final words of wisdom. Generically, I think for partnerships, you have to, as startup CEOs or executives, we have very busy lives, and it can be very hectic. But if you are engaged with a lot of partnerships and discussions, you have to find the time to contemplate and to really care about these conversations. You shouldn't be just winging them, and that's kind of my message is remember that there's a person across the table from you, that it's not just what you need, it's what they need as well, and it's important to care about the process. So I guess that's my final.
Good advice. Thank you. John?
Yeah, and I think the other point that we didn't have any time to discuss, but I think an important thing is when you start having conversations about strategic partnerships, to have a really solid idea about what it is that your company does and what it is that your company does not do, and making sure that a large enough organization approaches your company, you may feel very compelled to start doing the thing that they want to see done, but you have to really say, beyond what edge will we not pursue an idea, and it can be very difficult to walk away from a potential strategic partnership because it's out of scope, but it's a reality, and so I think making sure that you know what it is that you offer, what it is that you're not prepared to offer, is very useful in guiding that. And then, and just being prepared to have a lot of conversations before the thing starts to really fall into place. And that you may have a series of conversations that end up going sideways, but from how that happened, you will learn enough to be able to engage the next potential partner in a much more effective way. But it takes patience, and you have to sort of keep at it.
Also, excellent advice. Thank you. Thank you both so much for a really interesting, engaging conversation today. We really appreciate it. And once again, thank you to our sponsors, to MVM Associates, to Cesare Revis, and to University Place Associates. And thank you all in the audience for joining us today. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Great, thanks.